Picture something as tall as a two-story building, standing on six spindly legs, hurtling toward a world with almost no atmosphere to slow it down. It weighs about as much as a small car once you strip away the fuel. It's been flying for 6 days, alone through the vacuum of space, guided by lasers that are supposed to tell it exactly how far the ground is beneath its feet. Except those lasers aren't working. Nobody knew that until about an hour before touchdown. This thing is about to attempt something no private company on Earth has ever pulled off. And in the final 90 seconds, everything that could go slightly wrong does. Its name is Odysseus. And by the end of this video, you're going to understand why what looks like a failure, a spacecraft that literally tipped over on the moon, is actually one of the most important mistakes in the history of space exploration. Stop and sit with that for a second, because it's going to matter a lot more than you think, especially with what's happening again, right now, in 2026. Before we get into it, if you're new here, this channel is all about the missions, machines, and moments that are quietly rewriting what humans are capable of. We break down the science without the jargon, so hit subscribe now, because the next few minutes are going to change how you think about what success even means in space. Let's rewind to where this all started. For decades, only nations landed on the moon: the US, the Soviet Union, and much later, China. Landing on another world was considered so difficult, so unforgiving, that it stayed a government-only club for over 50 years. Every single attempt required the budget, the engineers, and the sheer institutional weight of an entire country behind it. NASA wanted to change that. In 2018, the agency launched a program called Commercial Lunar Payload Services, or CLPS, essentially a deal where NASA would pay private companies to build and fly their own robotic landers to the moon, carrying NASA's science experiments along for the ride. It was a bet. A bet that private industry, moving faster and spending less than a government program ever could, might be able to do something only superpowers had done before. The first attempt, a lander called Peregrine, built by a company called Astrobotic, failed within hours of launch in January 2024. A propellant leak crippled the spacecraft almost immediately, and it never even reached the moon. It burned up harmlessly back in Earth's atmosphere instead, a quiet, expensive reminder of just how thin the margin for error really is out there. Then came Intuitive Machines, a small Houston-based company, with a lander called Odysseus, nicknamed Odie. Their vehicle launched on February 15, 2024, riding a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket from Kennedy Space Center. The plan was simple, at least on paper: reach the moon, enter orbit, then descend and softly touch down near a crater called Malapert A, close to the lunar South Pole, one of the most difficult regions of the moon to land on, and one of the most scientifically important, because it's believed to hold frozen water in permanent shadow. Nobody expected this small company to succeed on their very first try. Governments had needed dozens of attempts and plenty of expensive failures to get this right. NASA's own task order for the mission was worth about $118 million, a huge sum by most standards, but almost pocket change compared to what a government-run lunar lander program typically costs. Odysseus wasn't just trying to reach the moon. It was trying to prove that a private company, with a fraction of NASA's budget, could do something only 3 nations in human history had ever done. And Malapert A wasn't chosen at random either. That region near the South Pole sits close to permanently shadowed craters, places sunlight has never touched, potentially for billions of years, where scientists believe frozen water ice might be locked away. If astronauts are ever going to live on the moon long term, that ice could become drinking water, breathable oxygen, even rocket fuel. Which is exactly why the terrain there is so brutal to land on in the first place. Jagged, poorly mapped, full of shadow and slope, precisely because nobody has ever needed to chart it carefully before. But none of that prepared anyone for what came next. Here's the first turning point, and it happened with almost no warning at all. About an hour before the scheduled landing, engineers on the ground discovered something was wrong. The lander's laser rangefinders, the instruments meant to bounce laser light off the lunar surface to measure altitude and closing speed with pinpoint accuracy, weren't working. In simple terms, imagine trying to parallel park a car, except the sensors that tell you how close you are to the curb have just gone silent, and you're going to have to guess, using something never designed for the job. So they did something remarkable instead. They repurposed a NASA science instrument that happened to be riding along on Odysseus for an unrelated experiment, a laser instrument that wasn't built for landing guidance at all, and rewrote the navigation software, live, in the final stretch before descent, to let that instrument step in and do the job the broken lasers couldn't. Think about what that actually means. This is the equivalent of your car's parking sensors failing on the highway, and in the last few minutes before you need them, someone rewires your backup camera to act as a distance sensor instead, while you're still driving. That's the level of improvisation happening in real time, live, on a spacecraft nobody could touch, 250,000 miles from Earth. And here's why that moment matters to you, even if you've never thought about spaceflight for more than 5 seconds. This is what real innovation actually looks like. Not clean, not perfect. It's a small group of engineers making an impossible call under impossible pressure, with no time to double-check their math, because the alternative was losing the entire mission. Every leap humanity has made, every one, has depended on people willing to make that kind of call. The landing sequence began, Mission Control watched the data stream in, waiting for confirmation. Here's the second turning point, and this is the moment the mission's name became attached to the word crash in headlines everywhere. Odysseus was supposed to descend at a gentle vertical speed of about 2 miles an hour, roughly the pace of a slow walk, with essentially zero horizontal motion. That's the target for any soft landing, straight down, slow and steady. The actual data, once engineers pulled it apart, told a different story. Odysseus touched down moving at roughly 6 miles an hour vertically, 3 times faster than planned, and about 2 miles an hour horizontally, sideways motion that wasn't supposed to be there at all. Somewhere in that final approach, one of its 6 landing legs likely caught on the terrain, on a slope estimated at around 12 degrees. That leg fractured. And as the engines wound down, the spacecraft gently tipped over, coming to rest on its side, propped up at roughly a 30-degree angle against the lunar surface. For a while, nobody on Earth knew if it had survived. There was no cheering in mission control at the expected moment of landing, the sign engineers usually wait for. Instead, silence and a faint, uncertain signal. It took time before Intuitive Machines could confirm what everyone desperately hoped: Odysseus was alive. Here's why this moment matters, and it's not what you'd expect. A spacecraft toppling over on an alien world sounds like the ending of the story. It's actually the beginning of a much bigger one, because Odysseus kept working, sideways, broken landing gear and all. Later, Intuitive Machines released an image showing the actual moment of impact, along with a detail that made the whole event feel even more real. A landing pad that had been rigged to break away on touchdown, an intentional shock absorber, snapped exactly as designed, just under conditions far rougher than anyone had planned for. Steve Altemus later described it almost gently, considering what had just happened. We sat there upright with the engine firing for a period of time, and then as it wound down, the vehicle just gently tipped over. Not a violent crash, not an explosion. A slow, almost graceful fall, sideways, onto another world. Which brings us to the third turning point, and this is the one that flips the entire narrative. Despite tipping onto its side, with some antennas now pointed uselessly at the ground and one science camera unable to fully deploy, Odysseus continued operating. It kept its solar panels charged, it kept transmitting data. Its scientific instruments, designed to study the lunar environment, radio astronomy, and space weather, kept functioning, sending real information back to Earth for roughly 6 days before lunar night finally cut off its power for good. NASA and Intuitive Machines officials stood in front of cameras afterward and called the mission, in its final hours, an unqualified success. Steve Altemus, the company's CEO, summed up their original goal plainly. We had some very high-level mission objectives to touch down softly on the surface of the moon, softly and safely, and return scientific data to our customers. Odysseus hadn't landed softly, but it had returned the data. It had become the first spacecraft built and flown by a private company to ever achieve a soft landing on the moon, and it was the first American vehicle of any kind to touch the lunar surface since Apollo 17 in 1972, over 50 years earlier. Here's why that should matter to you directly. This wasn't a government agency with a 50-year head start and a near-bottomless budget. This was a company you'd probably never heard of before this mission, doing something previously reserved for superpowers and getting real science home, even after everything went sideways, literally. That's not failure, that's resilience turned into data. If a spacecraft tipping over 250,000 miles from home and still finishing its job doesn't earn a like on this video, I don't know what does, so if you're finding this as fascinating as I do, tap it now and drop a comment telling me whether you think Odysseus counts as a success or a failure. I want to see where people land on this. Now for the fourth turning point, and it's the one that shows this wasn't just bad luck, it was a pattern. A little over a year later, Intuitive Machines tried again with a second lander, named Athena, launched in February 2025, again on a SpaceX Falcon 9. This time, the target was even more ambitious, Mons Mouton, closer to the lunar South Pole than any lander in history had ever attempted. And once again, laser rangefinder problems struck during descent. Athena touched down over 1,300 feet from its intended landing site, near the edge of a crater, and ended up on its side again, this time with less luck. Its solar panels couldn't generate enough power in that orientation, and within roughly 8 days, its batteries were fully depleted, ending the mission early. Here's why that matters, and it's not just 2 landers, 2 tip-overs, bad luck twice. It's evidence. 2 missions, same underlying failure point. The laser-based system meant to guide a spacecraft's final seconds above unfamiliar terrain. That's not coincidence, that's a genuine unsolved engineering problem, sitting right at the hardest, most unforgiving part of any landing, the last 100 feet, where there's no room left for error and no way to abort. A little over a year later, Intuitive Machines tried again with a second lander named Athena, launched in February 2025, again on a SpaceX Falcon 9. This time the target was even more ambitious, Mons Mouton, closer to the lunar South Pole than any lander in history had ever attempted. Steve Altemus, standing in front of reporters just before launch, captured the sheer strangeness of the moment. Humanity has never witnessed 3 lunar landers en route to the moon at the same time, and Athena is ready to rise to the occasion. 3 separate spacecraft, built by 3 different teams, all converging on the same alien world in the same short window. That alone tells you how quickly this new era was accelerating. And once again, laser rangefinder problems struck during descent. Athena touched down over 1,300 feet from its intended landing site, near the edge of a crater, and ended up on its side again, this time with less luck than Odysseus. Its solar panels couldn't generate enough power in that orientation, and within roughly 8 days, its batteries were fully depleted, ending the mission early. Now let's talk about the people behind all of this, because it's easy to reduce this to spacecraft and telemetry data and forget there were human beings living through every second of it. Tim Crane, Intuitive Machines co-founder and chief technology officer, has openly talked about sifting through the lessons from both landings afterward, trying to understand exactly what went wrong in that final stretch. Engineers who had spent years of their careers, some of it unpaid overtime, some of it staring at simulations that never quite matched what actually happened on the day, watched their spacecraft come in faster than planned, not knowing in real time whether the entire mission and years of work was about to be destroyed on impact. Picture the small team at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University, students who'd built a tiny camera called EagleCam, meant to capture the historic first landing from outside the spacecraft as it happened. Because of the last-minute navigation changes, EagleCam couldn't deploy during descent as planned. It was released days later instead, landing just a few meters away, and even then, the team wasn't sure if its camera or its wireless signal back to the lander was even working, especially with a battery life of only about 30 minutes to get any usable data at all. That's what real space exploration looks like behind the highlight reel. Constant improvisation, constant uncertainty, and teams of people, some of them still in college, carrying pieces of history on their shoulders, with no guarantee any of it would work. Think, too, about how thin the timeline actually was on the ground. Odysseus was only ever expected to survive about a week or 2 on the lunar surface before the sun set on its landing site, and the cold of a 2-week lunar night killed its electronics for good. That means every single hour of data, every photo, every reading had to be pulled down under a ticking clock that nobody could pause, negotiate with, or extend. Tim Crane, the company's co-founder and chief technology officer, put the stakes plainly when he talked about that shrinking runway. Once the sun set, he said, the batteries would try to keep the vehicle warm, but eventually the electronics simply won't survive the deep cold of lunar night. There was no rescue mission, no do-over. Whatever they got in those first days was all they were ever going to get. This is happening again, right now, in 2026. Intuitive Machines is preparing for its 3rd lunar landing attempt, IM-3, targeted for the second half of this year, heading to a strange, magnetized region of the moon called Reiner Gamma, a lunar swirl whose origin scientists still don't fully understand. Crane has said the team believes they've isolated exactly what went wrong on the first 2 attempts, calling it a fairly narrow piece of the mission that eluded them both times. In his words, it allows us to focus our energies on mastering this last piece that eluded us on this last mission. 3rd time, they hope, is the one where the spacecraft stays upright. And it's not just Intuitive Machines. This entire era of lunar exploration is accelerating in real time. NASA's own Artemis program, the effort to put astronauts back on the moon for the first time since Apollo, has been leaning hard on lessons from exactly these kinds of commercial missions. Mark this on your calendar. NASA is now targeting late 2027 for Artemis 3, a mission that will send 4 astronauts aboard the Orion spacecraft into Earth orbit to test rendezvous and docking with commercial lunar landers from SpaceX and Blue Origin, a dress rehearsal for the real thing without ever leaving Earth orbit. And if that goes as planned, NASA is targeting 2028 for Artemis 4, the mission intended to put American astronauts back on the lunar surface for the first time in over half a century. Not a rough guess, not a maybe. That's the number NASA is building toward, right now, with hardware already being assembled at Kennedy Space Center, and with SpaceX's own Starship-based human landing system still needing to prove it can refuel itself in orbit before it ever attempts to carry a crew down to the surface. Notice something about that plan because it's easy to miss. The exact same spacecraft that struggled to land upright on 2 commercial missions, and the exact same company building the human landing system for actual astronauts, are now operating in the same stretch of sky, learning from each other in real time. Every tipped-over lander, every laser rangefinder that failed at the worst possible second becomes a data point NASA can't get any other way, not from a simulation, not from a wind tunnel, only from the unforgiving reality of the moon itself. Step back for a second, because there's something bigger going on here than one tipped-over spacecraft or one company's second attempt. For almost all of human history, the moon was untouchable, a light in the sky, not a place. Then, for one incredible decade, it became a destination reachable only by the most powerful nations on Earth using nearly unlimited resources. And now, we're watching something new, a small company operating on a fraction of that budget, willing to fail publicly, on camera, in front of the entire world, and try again anyway. Odysseus tipping over wasn't the end of something. It was proof that landing on another world no longer requires being a superpower. It just requires being willing to try, to fail, to learn, and to try again, with actual humans and actual money and actual careers on the line every single time. That's the story humans have been writing since the very first fire, the very first boat, the very first flight. We don't wait until something is guaranteed to work. We go anyway, and we fix it in the air. But here's what nobody can answer yet, not even the engineers who build these machines. Why do the final 100 feet of a lunar landing remain this difficult, even after 50 years of spaceflight and multiple independent missions built by different teams, running into strikingly similar failures? Is it the terrain itself, the shadows, the slopes, the dust? Is it the sensors? Still not sophisticated enough for the harshest, least forgiving moment of the entire mission? Or is there something about landing on another world, something we still don't fully understand, that no amount of simulation on Earth can truly prepare you for? Nobody has a complete answer. Not intuitive machines, not NASA, not anyone yet. If this story pulled you in, subscribe and tap the notification bell, because upcoming lunar landings, including IM-3 later this year and the run-up to Artemis, are going to keep testing exactly this question in real time. Let me know in the comments what you think is really going wrong in those final seconds before touchdown, and if you learned something new here, share this with someone who thinks the moon is a solved problem. It isn't, not even close. In the next video, we're going deep into the spacecraft NASA is counting on to actually put astronauts back on the lunar surface, and why even that mission has already had to change its plan once. You won't want to miss it.